Hi, second graders. It's Miss S with your text study lesson today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. So something special about today's lesson versus our other online learning lessons is in all of our other lessons, I was only reading one book to you, but today is your lucky day, friends. We are going to be looking at two texts. So I'm really excited to jump in today. Today we're going to be comparing texts. So remember when we're comparing things or comparing texts, we're thinking about how they are similar and how they are different. So let's look at our steps. We're going to be comparing important points in a text on the same topic. Step number 1, what are both texts mostly about? Step number 2, find the important points in each text. And step number 3, what are the important points in both texts? So the texts that we're going to be looking at today are these two. So this first one should look very familiar to you. This is Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story. This is a book that we read aloud last week together. So if you do not remember doing this read aloud with me, then make sure you go back to last week's videos. I believe it was Thursday that we read aloud this book together. Go ahead and watch that and then come back and join us here. And then our other text that we're going to be comparing is Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington. So this book should look very familiar as well. This is a book that we looked at very much before we had to be staying home. So this was a book all about Martin Luther King Jr. and that really important day when they had the March on Washington. This is a book that we've definitely read together and looked at many times, so it's something that should just be already familiar to you. So remember in our videos, we always do an I do, we do, you do. So first you're going to be watching me practice comparing points, and then we're going to practice one together, and then it's your job to go on Google Classroom and log in yourself and answer the your turn question. So let's jump right in. I'm going to show you how I do it first. So the question is, which of the following key points is made in both texts? So what is the key point made in both texts? We know that key points are important points that an author makes in a text that the author wants you to leave the book knowing for sure. So if there's any points that the author wants you to know for sure, they're the key points. So looking at our steps to answer this question, step number 1, what are both texts mostly about? So we know this book about Ruby Bridges is mostly about Ruby and her legacy and how she was able to change segregation and help make integration of schools more common and more well accepted in society. And then we have this text about Martin Luther King Jr. This text is mostly about Martin Luther King Jr. and his life, as well as why his presence was so important on the day of the March on Washington. Step number 2, find the important points in each text. So looking at our text, the important points in our first text about Ruby Bridges, we have that the important points are that Ruby Bridges was the first Black student to attend William Frantz Elementary during a time of segregation. So when many public places were separate, she was forced to go to an all-white school, and she was the first one at this specific school to go there. Another key point in this text is that Ruby made a difference in helping schools accept children of all races. And the last key point that we learned is that even after slavery ended during this time, many states had segregation laws that kept white people and Black people apart in public places. Looking at the key points in this text, the key points are that in 1963, 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington to protest the treatment of Black people in our country. And even after slavery ended, many states still had segregation laws that would keep Black and white people apart. Another key point is that the March on Washington helped change racist laws in our country. And the last key point is that Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders made a difference in speaking out against inequality in our country or things that were not equal between white people and Black people. All right, friends, thanks for sticking with me. Step number 3, what are the important points in bold text? So looking at our important points, I would say the important point that is common in bold text is that bold text show us that there was segregation or separation of white and black people in our country even after slavery ended. That was the only point that I mentioned that was common in bold text. So to answer our original question, following our steps, which is which of the following key points is made in bold text, the key point is that even after slavery ended, many states had segregation laws that kept white and black people apart. Great job, friends. So now we're going to try one together following our steps. Our next question is, which text makes the point that white people and black people would refuse to send their children to integrated schools? So remember, integrated schools were schools where white and black children both went. So they were integrated or put together. So the question once again is, which text, because there's only one of them, or there could be both, which one of them makes the point that white people would refuse to send their children to integrated schools? So let's follow our steps again. Step number 1, what are bold texts mostly about? I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to think about it, and then we're going to answer it together. So I want you to think, what are bold texts mostly about? What's the topic of both of our texts? Yes, friends. So the topic of this text is that all about Ruby Bridges and her legacy and how she changed civil rights in our country. And then this text is all about Martin Luther King Jr. and how he changed civil rights in our country and made people more equal. All right, step number 2, find the important points in each text. So I kind of did that in our model last time, that Martin Luther King Jr., this text is all about the March on Washington, and that even after slavery ended, there was still segregation in our country, and that Martin Luther King Jr. helped speak out against injustice. And Ruby Bridges, in this text, we learned that she was the first black child to attend William Frantz Elementary School, and that she helped make a difference in helping schools accept children of both races. So step number 3, which one is common in both texts? So actually this question is a little bit different in step 3 because it's asking us, let me pull it up. It's asking us which one refused to send their children to integrated schools. So the options are either Ruby Bridges, Martin Luther King Jr., you could say that both texts had this key point, or neither text had this key point. So once again, which text makes the point that white children would refuse to send their children to integrated schools? So I know you don't have this text in front of you, so you're not able to flip through it. So I'm just going to tell you guys what I realized flipping through this text to answer this question. So we know that in Ruby Bridges, she helped integrate schools. She helped by starting to attend an all-white school. So, flipping through this text, I realized that this key point is made in this text because it says right here, parents took their children out of the school. I was alone with my teacher, Mrs. Henry. So, because Ruby started attending this school, other white families decided that they didn't want the children to go to the school. They refused to send their children to integrated school. So we know for sure this key point is definitely made in Ruby Bridges. I already did this for you guys where I flipped through this text about Martin Luther King Jr. and there is no mention of this key point, although they do talk about a lot of inequality in the laws in our country. They do not mention white people refusing to send their children to school. So the only possible answer for this question would be that this key point is only made in Ruby Bridges. It is not made in Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington. All right, friends, great job. Now, the last step, it's your turn to go into Google Classroom and read and answer the question. I am going to read the question for you. So the question in Google Classroom for your turn says, what is similar about both texts? What is similar? So here are your options. A, bold texts talk about segregation in schools and the white people who protested it. Bold texts talk about how important the March on Washington was. Bold texts taught us about civil rights leaders who helped achieve equality for Black people in our country. And D, bold texts teach us who inspired famous people like Eleanor Roosevelt. So please, friends, make sure you are logging on into Google Classroom and answering that question. I'm so excited to see your responses, and see you guys tomorrow.